job. So in the first service, Emma Jane Phillips was literally knocking people down up here, and she won. So next week we're going to have Reeve and Emma Jane do one. And Reeve, I'm telling you, my money's on Emma Jane. Just want you to know that. But what was your favorite game when you were a kid? I was mostly drawn to sports, but there are a lot of different options when you're a kid. I was thinking back this week about Duck, Duck, Goose. Remember that? Everybody sits in a circle and you go down, you hit each other on top of the head as hard as you can, or at least that's the way we did, and then you chase each other around the circle. Then there's the classic game Red Rover, and you get this human chain, you interlock arms, and there's another chain across from you. You call somebody's name, and you invite them to run towards you as hard as they can to see if they can break through your arms. The idea, of course, is that you hope they don't get hurt, and you especially hope that you don't get hurt, but a trip to the emergency room is a small price to pay for a win. And then, of course, the game that you just saw, musical chairs. Historians don't know where it came from, but it's been around for centuries, and it kind of had a resurgence in popularity over the last few years. And one of the reasons it's so popular is because it's so simple. I mean, in our world, we've got, these high-tech gaming systems and internet connections and online tournaments, but to play musical chairs, all you need is just a few friends and a little bit of music and a couple chairs, and you can at least entertain yourself for a few minutes. It's kind of beautiful in its simplicity. The other thing about musical chairs is that you don't have to scour the internet looking for tips. I mean, there's no real strategy to it. There's really only one key to winning. That's that you keep moving. You keep moving towards whatever that next chair is. Now, if you stop too soon, as you just saw demonstrated with Austin, which I think he did on purpose, but anyways, you know that you're not going to win. You have to keep moving towards whatever that next chair is. And the same thing that's true in musical chairs is true in your spiritual life. In order to become the person that God created you to be, you have to keep moving. The problem, though, for a lot of us is that at some point in our journey, Reeve had to go get water like he really did something. Anyways, wow. The problem for a lot of us, though, is that either consciously or unconsciously, at some point, we kind of decided we were comfortable where we are, and we just sort of stopped moving. Maybe you found a certain level, didn't demand much out of you, you liked the place you were at, so you just sort of stopped. Or you've seen other people do this, we start to go the wrong direction. And rather than pushing forward toward whatever that next chair is, we start to slide back there. But it doesn't have to be that way. If you have your Bible, I want you to open up or your phone to Luke chapter 24. This morning we're kicking off a new series we're calling Musical Chairs, and it's based on a concept we first talked about in August of 2018. And the idea behind it is that, spiritually speaking, every single person is sitting in one of four chairs. We're going to put the names of the chairs up on the screen just so we're all on the same page. So the first chair is you're a seeker, which means you've not really decided what it is you believe about Jesus yet. You're still trying to figure it all out. Then hopefully eventually you become a follower of Jesus, meaning that you're somebody that's put your faith in Jesus. Then eventually you go a little further down the road, you become a servant, which means you're actively using your gifts to serve other people, to advance God's kingdom. And then the last chair is you become a leader and you help other people experience what you've experienced. As you look at these labels, it's obvious that just like in the game Musical Chairs, that there should be a natural progression. I mean, you should sort of work your way through these in order, but we all know that it's rarely that predictable. Like I said, some people figure out a spot they're comfortable and they just sort of stay there. Other people, for whatever reason, they get distracted. They start to go a different direction. But I think we can do better. So over the next few weeks, wherever you are, wherever you find yourself sitting, in terms of those four chairs, we're going to challenge you to consider going to the next one. I'm not asking you to skip all three levels. I'm just saying, wherever you are, just take the next step. So if you're a seeker, we want you to become a follower. If you're a follower, we want you to consider becoming a servant. And if you're already a servant, we want you to consider becoming a leader. So every week when you come in, we're going to talk about one of those chairs and talk about how to get from where you are to whatever that next level looks like for you. And today we're going to talk about how to move from seeking to finding. So Luke 24, as we pick up the story, it's now late in the afternoon on the first Easter Sunday. And what we're going to read takes place just a few hours after the resurrection. The reason that's important, it means that the two guys that we're going to read about are essentially in the same situation that you and I find ourselves in. Jesus has already been to the cross. He's already paid the penalty for their sin. And now they're trying to figure out, they've heard these rumors that he's come back from the dead, and they're trying to make sense of everything they're hearing and figure out where they land. So if you have your Bible open, I want you to check this out with me. Verse 13 of Luke 24. Now that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened. So the implication is, if you read the before this part of the story in the context, is these two guys had traveled to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover. We talked about that some last week. So because of that, when Jesus and his entourage arrived in the city, what we call the Triumphal Entry, these two guys were already there. So if you remember the story, Jesus rides into the city on the back of a donkey. And there's thousands of people who sort of line the streets, and they're waving these palm branches, and they think they're welcoming a king. They think Jesus has come to take control of Jerusalem, to kick out the Romans, and restore the kingdom of Israel. But on Thursday night of that week, the tide had turned pretty sharply. And rather than taking over as a king, Jesus is arrested by the religious authorities. On Friday morning, he's crucified by the Roman authorities. And for these two guys and the thousands of people who had been in the crowd that welcomed Jesus into the city, what had started out as a dream had quickly turned into a nightmare. And now that it looks like things are all over, these two guys are headed back home. And they live in a little village. Luke tells us it's 7 miles outside of Jerusalem. But if you'd been these two guys, I'm sure it felt like it was a lot longer. At this point, they're both discouraged, they're both disillusioned, and they're facing an uncertain future. Nothing for them has turned out like they thought it would, and now they're asking the question, where do we go from here? What are we supposed to do next? Now, to be honest, that's a pretty good picture of where a lot of people in our culture find themselves. People that you work with, people that you interact with on a daily basis. So many people just completely discouraged, completely disillusioned. Nothing in their life has turned out like they dreamed it would, like they planned that it would. And no matter what they do, they can't seem to find a way to make things better. If you don't believe me, next time you go to the store, just spend some time walking up and down some of the aisles and just watch the people. Or easier still, when you go home today, just get on your social media feed, scroll through for a few minutes, and just read what people are saying, read what they're posting. You'll start to see that everywhere you look, man, there are people that are frustrated and angry and bitter. And to complicate things even more, especially in our community, there are a lot of people who sort of heard the story of Jesus. They've heard the claims of the resurrection, but for whatever reason, they've never really decided whether or not they believe it and where they land with all that. So what do you do? How do you help those people? Maybe you fall into that category yourself. What we're going to do in this story in Luke 24 is look at a process that works the same for everybody. Now, the timeline might be different, but the process works the same. It worked this way for you. It'll work this way for the people that you're closest to. And if you want to help people move from seeking to finding, there's a clear process. So if you're keeping track on your bulletin or on the FCC app, here's the first one. You have to make sure that you engage in conversation. Now, here are these two guys. They're on their way back home, and as they travel, Luke tells us that they're talking with one another about everything that's happened. Excuse me. Then you get to verse 15, and the most amazing thing happens. Check this out, verse 15. As they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them, but they were kept from recognizing him. Let me ask you a question. I want you to think back in your mind. When's the last time you had a conversation with somebody who you knew was not a believer in Jesus in hopes of moving that person closer to a relationship with Jesus? Just think about it. In your own mind, when's the last time that you had a conversation like that? How long has it been? Maybe a few weeks? Maybe a few years. For some people, the answer, unfortunately, would be probably never. Maybe never had a conversation like that. And there's a problem that can happen, and some of us have experienced this, and it's this: the longer that you're a follower of Jesus, the more you sort of lose touch with with lost people. And it's not really intentional. It just sort of works out that way. You wake up one day and you realize that most of the people you hang out with are people from your church. And the only people that you really ever have over to your house are people that are already members of a church or members of your Sunday school class or your Connect group. And then you look, and most of the people you hang out with on the weekends are members of your church or members of your immediate family. And that's not all bad, but what can happen if you're not careful is that you can spend all of your time with people who are already following Jesus and never really get around to building relationships with people who aren't following Jesus. And so what happens is your world starts to grow smaller and smaller. And as your world grows smaller, your impact on the community around you becomes less and less. That's why most churches, if they were to close, nobody would really notice because they're not having much impact to start with. But there's a reason we do that, and you know what it is. The reason is we do that because it's more comfortable to do that. I mean, when you spend all your time hanging out with people who already think like you think and already view the world like you view the world, they already believe the things that you believe, there's some expectations that come with that, and nobody's going to ask you anything that's too uncomfortable. Nobody's going to bring up certain topics that might be too controversial. And for the most part, church people are pretty nice to each other, so you don't have to worry about that. But when you break out of that bubble, things start to get a little bit uncomfortable. I mean, when you find yourself and you're sitting around a table with people that view the world differently than you view the world, all of a sudden there's some questions that get asked, a little bit uncomfortable. And there's some topics that start to come up, that start to be a little controversial. You're not sure you want to wade into those waters. And if you're not used to that and you're not prepared for that, it can be a pretty uncomfortable situation. So here's what we do: rather than trying to risk the discomfort, rather than getting out of our comfort zone, a lot of us, we've allowed our worlds to shrink to the point where we hardly ever have any real conversations with people who aren't already following Jesus. And then we sit back and we wonder, why aren't we impacting our community? It could be because we're not talking to anybody in our community. See, to have an impact on the people around you, you first have to have the courage to have some real conversations, to build some real relationships with people who may not believe what you believe in and may not view the world the same way that you view the world. Now, here's the second step, and this can be a challenge for some of us. As you engage in these conversations, you have to learn to listen intently. Now, if you're like me, that can be a challenge because you like to talk more than you listen. But if you want to make progress, you have to listen to what the other people are saying. Check out how Jesus does this. Verse 17. He asked them, "What are you discussing together as you walk along?" They stood still, their faces downcast. One of them, named Cleopas, asked him, "Are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days?" "What things?" he asked. "About Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. "He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. And what is more, it is the third day since all this took place. In addition, some of our women amazed us. They went to the tomb early this morning but didn't find his body. They came and told us that they had seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Then some of our companions went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see Jesus." Make sure you catch that line in verse 21. It said, "We had hoped that he was the one." Now, had you been there, you would have heard the deep disappointment in their voices. And then they follow that up by mentioning that it's now been 3 days. And the reason that's important in the Jewish world, they believe that a person's soul or their spirit would hover around their body for 3 days. And now that the 3 days are up, in their mind, it's game over. The dreams are not going to come true. Their hearts are broken. Their minds are spinning. They've heard these rumors. They're trying to figure out what to believe and who to pay attention to. And nobody knows what to think. Nobody knows what to do. And for these two guys in the story, they're in a situation in which things are not going well. They don't know where to turn. Back in February, I told you about this tool that I sometimes use, and I want to put it on the screen. It's called the 3 knots. These are things that that you can listen for, that once you hear them in a conversation, you've got an open door. So when somebody says they're not prepared for something, for example, you're in a conversation and somebody says, I'm not sure I'm ready for whatever it is that's coming, a change in job, an upcoming surgery, something to do with their kids. All of a sudden, they've opened the door. When somebody says they're not in church. So you get in this conversation on Monday, you're talking to your coworkers, you mentioned you went to church yesterday, and all of a sudden somebody says, I heard you say you go to church yesterday, and I've not been in church in a long time. All of a sudden, there's your opening. Or when somebody says that something's not going well. I don't think my kids are listening to me anymore. Things at home, not going well. Things at my job are pretty rough. And all of a sudden, if you're listening, you've got an open door to have a spiritual conversation, to encourage that person in a spiritual direction. But here's the problem with this, and you know what it is. If you're in a conversation with somebody else and you're doing all the talking, guess what? You're not going to hear them say these things. In order to hear these open doors and hear these phrases, you have to be willing to slow down and listen, let the other person talk. And then when those doors open, you've got to be prepared to step through those doors. That's the third thing you see in this process. At some point in this conversation, somebody has to explain the gospel. Let's check out how Jesus does this. Verse 25. He said to them, "How foolish you are, and how slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter his glory? And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself." In the business world, there's a huge emphasis in our day on what's called an elevator pitch. And the idea is if you found yourself riding an elevator and with somebody who had the power to boost your career, and you had 20 or 30 seconds to explain who you are and what you do, how would you prepare for that moment? And so people have really practiced this. In fact, you can go online, there are consultants that you can hire, pay them thousands of dollars, and they'll help you develop the perfect elevator pitch for you that'll explain what it is that you offer in your career. And they'll even coach you on how to deliver it. So they'll tell you, here's how you speak quickly, but not too quickly. Here's how you make sure you hit the primary points. Here's how you follow up without seeming too pushy. And these people make literally thousands of dollars doing this because people know if I've got a 20 or 30 second window to make an impact, I've got to make the most of my opportunity. Now, let's expand that out just a bit. And I want you to imagine that somebody that you love, somebody you're close to, a coworker, somebody in your family, maybe one of your kids or your grandkids, they come to you and they say something like this: "Hey, I've been thinking about what you've said before, and I'm going to give you 5 minutes to explain the gospel to me." You got 5 minutes. Could you do it? 5 minutes. You don't have time to call me or David. You don't have time to call anybody. You don't have time to, get Google out and say, how do you do this? You don't have time to do any of that. You can't flip all over your Bible. I mean, you got 5 minutes just to tell the story. Could you do it? Would you be prepared for that? See, in this instance, Jesus saw an opportunity, and when he saw his opportunity, he stepped through that door. He was ready to seize that moment. So starting with the Old Testament and going all the way through the events of that very weekend, he explains the gospel. But now for some of us, we know, hey, I'm not Jesus and you're not either, so that's pretty intimidating. You think, I'm not even sure I know enough about the Old Testament to do that. And nobody expects you to be able to answer everybody's questions. Nobody expects you to be able to weave all the different lines together. But here's what you should be able to do. At a moment's notice, if somebody gave you 5 minutes, if somebody said the right phrase in a conversation, you should be able to step back from that and tell the story of how Jesus brought you from death to life. Every single person who's following Jesus should be able to do that. And you don't have to answer all their questions. You don't have to explain the theology. But you ought to be able, in 1 5-minute period, to talk about where you were, how Jesus changed your life, and where you are now. And if you'll be able to do that, you'll be able to impact people in a way that you can't imagine. But you can't do that if you don't listen for the openings. Now here's the fourth step in this process. You have to invest the necessary time. If you put together a timeline of this interaction, it starts about 4 p.m. That's when Jesus first engages in the conversation. When you get to verse 28, It's now about 6 p.m. and they're arriving at home. So they play this game in which Jesus acts as if he's going to keep walking. They ask him to stay for the night. So he comes in and they sit down around the table together. And I want you to listen to what happens in verse 28. As they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus continued on as if he were going farther. But they urged him strongly, "Stay with us, for it is nearly evening, the day is almost over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, gave thanks, broke it, and began to give it to them. Now check this out, verse 31. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he disappeared from their sight. They asked each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us?" Now, some people read this, they think it's a reference to communion. I don't think so. I think what's going on here, these guys have been on the road all day, they're hungry, they sit down to enjoy this meal together, and at some point during the meal, everything clicks into place. The Holy Spirit illuminates their heart, the blinders fall off. I mean, verse 15 says they were kept from recognizing, but all of a sudden, all of that disappears, and for the very first time that afternoon, they see Jesus for who he is. And maybe it happened when he said a particular phrase and they recognized his voice. Maybe it happened as he reached for another piece of bread and they saw the scars in his wrist that where he'd been nailed to the cross. I don't know how it happened, but the important thing is that it happened. And for these two guys, this was a process that took about a week. I mean, they spent a week celebrating the Passover, and then in the span of one afternoon leading into one evening, all the pieces fall into place, and they realize who Jesus is, and they make their decision. Now, for most people, it'll take longer than a week. And that can be frustrating because here's what we do. If you're like me, there's somebody you're worried about. There's somebody you feel drawn to talk to them, and you talk to them, and maybe it doesn't go well, and you sort of mark them off the list. You say, well, I did my best, and we sort of move on. But most of the time, we're not willing to invest the time that it takes to really move somebody to that next step. I read something this week that sort of stopped me in my tracks. I wanted to share it with you. This is from the Barna Research Group. I want you to listen to what they wrote. Quote, "Just as our nation's culture has changed dramatically in the last 30 years, so has the way in which people come to Christ." Now catch this, so important. "The weekend church service is no longer the primary mechanism for salvation decisions. Only 1 out of every 10 people who makes the decision to follow Christ does so in a church setting or service." Did you hear that? Only 1 out of 10. On the other hand, personal relationships have become even more important in evangelism, with a majority of salvation decisions coming in direct response to an invitation given by a family member or friend. According to the experts, the people who research this, the conversations that you're having and the time that you're investing in trying to share your faith with the people closest to you has more to do with whether or not those people will spend eternity in heaven than anything we do inside this room on a weekend. Make sure you understand, the conversations that you're having, the things that you say are more important than the things that I say. And what you do on a week-to-week basis, or maybe what you don't do, will impact more people than anything any member of our team does or doesn't do. That's why all of us have to invest the necessary time to move people closer to a relationship with Jesus. One more thing you see in this process. Once a decision is made, it's critical that they connect with others. I want you to check out verse 33. They got up and returned at once to Jerusalem. There they found the 11 and those with them assembled together and saying, "It is true, the Lord has risen and has appeared to Simon." And then the two told what had happened on the way and how Jesus was recognized by them when he broke the bread. Really incredible. They've been gone all week. They walk 7 miles home. They have this moment where they recognize Jesus, and they immediately get up from the table and they walk the 7 miles directly back to Jerusalem. Why would they do that? They did that because they knew that once you have an experience with Jesus, it's critical that you connect with other people who have also had experiences with Jesus. One of the things you see throughout the New Testament over and over again is you can't find a single example of somebody who's following Jesus who's not also part of a larger community of faith. We would call that a church. There are no Lone Ranger Christians in the Bible. Everybody who followed Jesus, the people who were closest to Jesus, followed him in the context of the community. And to be honest, I mean, that's the missing piece for most people. There's so many people in our culture who just convinced themselves, hey, my relationship with God's, private matter between God and myself. But the truth is that the biggest part of how much progress you make in your spiritual life will be determined by who you're hanging out with and the other people that you're connected to. That means for some of you, the best possible thing that you could do to improve your spiritual life, to move toward that next level, is to find some ways to connect with other people who are moving in the same direction. We've got all kinds of groups here. If you got questions about that, Austin's going to be out at Connection Point in our lobby. He'd love to help you find the right group. But the key is, if you're going to move up, you got to find people going the same direction you're going. I have a picture I want to show you. According to the Guinness Book of World Records, the world's largest and longest game of musical chairs took place on August 5th, 1989 at a high school over in Singapore. This is a picture taken from the later rounds. As the day began, there were 8,238 people competing against one another to get their name in the record book so they could be the winner of the world's largest game of musical chairs. With that many people, it took 3 hours and 36 minutes before they finally, a 15-year-old sophomore at the high school, claimed the last remaining chair and got his name in the record book. You can see from the picture, this is a little more intense than what most of us remember when it comes to musical chairs. If I did the math correctly, in order to narrow the field down from 8,238 to 1, they had to stop the music every 6 seconds. So for 3 hours and 36 minutes, every 6 seconds, people are fighting over chairs. They're scratching and clawing. They're trying to get to that next empty chair so that they can get their name in the record book. It was 3 hours and 36 minutes of constant movement. But here's the thing. Doesn't matter if you're playing against 8,237 other people or you're playing against 3 other people. The key to winning is always the same. You just have to keep moving. You have to keep moving toward that next chair. And for some of us, as we look back over our lives, we've been playing this game for a long time. A lot longer than 3 hours and 36 minutes. Some of us have been playing it for years. Some of us have been playing it for decades. And yet, if you were forced to be honest, as you look back over your life, you'd have to say, you know what? I'm not sure I've made much progress. See, the tragedy is that so many of us are still sitting in the same spot that we entered into. We've never really made any improvement. We just sort of got comfortable where we were. We just sort of fell into this spot, and it didn't demand too much out of us and didn't require too much out of us. So we just sort of stayed where we were, and it's just sort of, and the music's still going. I mean, the game's still going, but we're just sort of sitting there. And we're not really making progress. We hope we're not moving backward, but we're not really doing anything to grab onto that next chair, to take ourselves to that next level. As we close today, I got 3 really specific applications. I don't always do this, but these are for 3 different groups of people. And if you're here this morning and you've been coming for a while and you feel like, you would say, I'm a part of this church. I feel like this is my church home. And for whatever reason, you've never yet joined the family here at FCC. I want you to consider doing that today. A lot of people who come here every weekend and they show up regularly, but they've never joined the family. And if that's you, I want you to do that. The truth is, we need you and you need us, and you can't find an example of anybody in the Bible that was following Jesus apart from their connection to a larger church family. And for some of you, that may be the missing piece. That may be the very next step that you need to take. And here's a second challenge. Some of you are here, and you've never yet decided what it is that you believe about Jesus. You heard the stories, you know all about the claims of the resurrection, but for some reason you've never really made a decision where you fall into all of that. And if that's you, I want to ask you if you would at least just talk to us. We're not going to twist your arm, not going to put you in a headlock, not going to do any of that. Dave and I we'd love to talk to you. Maybe we can point you in the right direction. Maybe we can give you something to read. We'd be glad to pray with you. I mean, whatever it is you want us to do. But we just want you to talk to us. And I'm not going to be mad if you walk away and say, I still don't believe that. I'm not going to be mad at you, but you're not going to get anywhere until you have some pretty serious conversations. So we're going to be up here. We'll be here after the service. You want to come up and talk to us after? You want to make an appointment to talk to us? We'll do whatever you want to do. But I just want to encourage you, just talk to us. Now, the last thing, if you have your bulletin, I meant to bring mine. I want you to take your bulletin out, or you can use a piece of paper, whatever it is. Just take that out. And at the bottom of your bulletin there is a blank line on your outline. We left it there intentionally. What we want you to do is just write the name. If you're uncomfortable with the name, just write the initials of somebody that you already know, somebody that you're close to that you know is not a follower of Jesus. And then we want you to take that with you and just pray for that person every day over the next few weeks, and then take it to the next level. Don't just pray for them. Begin to listen for those openings and those conversations. And then when you hear that opening, you be willing to step through that door. And our hope is that by the end of this summer, some of the people we're praying for would start to be a part of our family, and more importantly, part of God's family. I want you to stand with me. The band is going to lead us in a song, but here's what I'd say to you. Some of you are wondering, I don't know what to do, and I don't know what the next step for me is. Just spend this time praying. If you're already following Jesus, then your job is to help other people follow Jesus. If you're not yet following him, your job is to make a decision about what comes next for you. But here's the thing I want you to understand. No matter what anybody tells you, no matter what you go through in life, eventually, just like in musical chairs, eventually, the music stops for the last time. And when it does, the only thing that matters then, was I in the right seat? And were the people closest to me in the right seats? And if you're not, and if they're not, we got work to do.